All right, giving you a quick revision of the fundamental principles of ethics and the 5 ethical threats. And then we'll move towards the detailed issues, the details of situations which will give rise to the ethical risk and the ethical threats. So we'll discuss those situations which give rise to the ethical threats and the ethical risks. So in the last lecture, we discussed the fundamental principles of the ethics. Now, these are, sorry, the key attributes you expect in a professional, particularly the professional accountant. You are talking about the auditor over here. Professional behavior, following the laws and regulation, and avoiding action that discourages the profession. Integrity is to be honest and straightforward. Confidentiality is respecting the confidentiality of the information, not to disclose that without prior permission, except for the situation which we'll be discussing later on. For example, when there is a legal requirement to disclose those things. For example, your client is involved in money laundering or terrorist activities, things like that. In that case, you have the obligation to disclose such events to the relevant authorities. And then we have the competence and the due care. Now, the competence and the due care is maintaining the skills and knowledge to provide the professional services, acting diligently, acting with due care. The standard of care the client is expecting from you, you should meet that, because obviously they're expecting a standard of care from a professional. So this is not something related to a layman. This is something very professional, because you are an accountant, you are a professional, you are an auditor. So the level of expectation they're having is of the professional level. And so it is very important that you should meet the standard of care they're expecting from you. And objectivity is to be unbiased, impartial, and do not allow influence of others on your professional judgment. So for example, if you're accepting the bribes, if you're accepting the significant gifts and hospitalities, then your judgment may be influenced by that conduct. So the professional accountant, particularly the auditor in this situation, needs to make sure that their judgment is not affected by anything such as the bribes and gifts and hospitality and any unusual favors by the audit client. Then we have the most important thing, which are the 5 ethical threats, which are the threats to the independence, threats to the objectivity. Because in this lecture, we are going to discuss the situations in detail which give rise to these ethical threats. Now, what is self-interest threat? Acting in your own interest. For example, if the audit firm or the auditor is acting in their own interest, this is the self-interest threat. When the auditor is reviewing their own work, that is known as the self-review threat. Advocacy is when they are representing the client, they're taking the position of the client rather than being independent. That is known as advocacy, when you're giving them unusual favors by representing them. This is the advocacy. And the familiarity is when you have a long-standing relationship with the audit client, when you have the friendly relationship, when you have the business relationship, a family relationship, too friendly, too close, that represents the familiarity threat. And the last one is the intimidation. Now, intimidation, when the client pressurize you, when the client threaten you, for example, by saying we are not going to give you the fee, we are going to sue you in the court, things like that is represents the intimidation threat. Now, we are going to discuss the situations in detail which give rise to these ethical threats. Now, every situation which we are going to discuss, every situation which we are going to discuss give rise to a different and a unique threat from these 5 ethical threats. Now, the most common misconception regarding the exam is that when the examiner gives you a case study within an exam question, like for example, when it is coming from the ethics. So in the exam, if the examiner is giving you a case study, a question, a constructed response question, which is the case study. And for example, it says, identify and explain 5 ethical threats. Now, the examiner has given you within the case study the situations. For example, they've given you the situation of the financial interest, they have given you the situation of the close business relationship, and they're expecting you to identify and explain the threats from those situations. Like for example, If an audit firm or a member of the audit firm holds some shares in the audit client, now this is the financial interest, and this represents the self-interest, right? Now, most of the students think that when we have written the self-interest threat, now we cannot write that self-interest threat again because it has already been covered in the financial interest. No, this is not the case. Examiner is asking you to identify 5 ethical threats from different situations. Like for example, examiner gives you the financial interest, and similarly, they can give you the close business relationship. Examiner can give you the financial interest and similarly the close business relationship. Now, the financial interest and the close business relationship both give rise to the self-interest threat. So you can write the self-interest threat again because it is a threat in another situation, not the same situation. So do not mistake it in the exam. Do not confuse it in the exam that once you have written the self-interest thread, you cannot write it again because it is altogether a different story. Examiner is asking you to identify the ethical threats from different situations. It will be a different situation altogether: financial interest, close business relationship, employment with an audit client. So do not mistake that thing within the exam. All right, so now starting with the financial interest. Now, what is financial interest? If the audit firm, member of the audit firm, or the family member of the audit firm is having a financial interest within the client. For example, they are having the financial interest in the form of the shares, it is in the form of the investments. So if they're having the shared firm, member of the audit firm, family member of the auditor, having shares within the client or investment within the client, this represents the financial interest. That represents the self-interest. Right? Now, giving you an example, for example, if I am an audit manager in the audit firm and I'm going to audit a client, let's assume ABC company. Now, within ABC company, I'm having the shares. So what is the problem? How it is the self-interest, right? Because when I will be going over there to the audit, obviously I need to remain independent in order to see the financial statement, whether or not they are true and fair, whether they are prepared in all material respects, whether they are prepared in accordance with the international financial reporting standard or the relevant financial reporting framework. So let's assume I saw the financial statements and they're completely manipulated. There are so many misstatements in it. And now if I challenge those misstatements and I ask the management to fix it, the profit will be decreased and maybe the profit converts to loss. And if the profit converts to loss because they have manipulated the thing, the share price will be affected as well. And I'm also having the shares within that audit client. So this is in my interest to keep the things simple and do not challenge them, because otherwise else I will be having financial loss as well. So this is the act in the self-interest. It can be from the firm itself, it can be from the member of the firm. So this is known as the self-interest threat. So if the firm or the member of the firm or the immediate family member of the firm, immediate means the spouse or the dependent child, is having direct or indirect material financial interest in the client, that represents a self-interest threat. Now, what are the safeguards? The safeguards are, first of all, if the firm is having the shares and they really want to continue the audit, they can dispose the shares. Or if an individual is having the shares and obviously they cannot sell those shares, then you can remove that individual from the audit team, take someone else to the audit, and do not take that individual who's having the financial interest. And the other two safeguards are very important, and you will see these safeguards often in the other safeguards of different situations. The first one is keeping the client's audit committee informed of the situation. Now, what is audit committee? Audit committee is the board committee of the company, which is responsible for conducting the audit in an independent way. So it consists of the independent non-executive directors, and this is what you have already studied in your F1 exam. So audit committee consists of independent non-executive directors who are responsible for conducting the audit in an independent way. Now, if you're having any sort of financial interest in the client, So you can disclose that matter to the client's audit committee to, show more transparency towards the situation. So you tell them, look, we are having the shares and this financial interest cannot affect our independence. Hence, we are actually telling you this thing because we need to keep it open and transparent. So when you're telling this thing to the audit committee, it shows your transparency and openness towards the situation. And the last safeguard, no, in the exam, you do not need to write all four of it. Uh, we are studying it because the examiner may give you an objective test question and it says which of the following is not the safeguard in situation of the financial interest. Now, so you need to study this thing for the case study as well as the objective test question. So we need to study all the safeguards because you may have that thing within the objective test questions. The last safeguard is using an independent partner to review the work carried out if necessary. Now, this is in the situation where you are having the shares and you did perform the audit. Now, in order to make sure that your independence was not compromised, what you're doing as you're actually reviewing your work by an independent partner. You are telling an independent partner who was not involved in this engagement, who was not an engagement partner, and you're telling them to review your audit file. Why is that? Because I told you in the chapter number 1, the QCR thing, the quality control review. Your professional body is going to audit you, which is the audit of auditors. And they may ask you, when you were having the shares, how did you perform the audit? And you will be telling them, look, we were having some shares, we were having a financial interest, we disclosed that thing to the audit committee. And after doing that, we have also reviewed our audit file from an independent partner, and he has confirmed, or they have confirmed as well, that our independence was not compromised. So this is what you are doing in order to reduce your liability. You're telling an independent partner to review your work, and they give you the confidence as well that, okay, everything was fine. Now, in that case, you can show that thing to later on to your QCR, QCR professional body who will be doing your QCR. So this is the financial interest. Now, for the exam, you need to remember that having the shares, having the investment either by the firm or the member of the firm or the family member of the firm represents the self-interest threat, and the safeguards are disposing the shares if possible. And if it is about the individual, you should remove that individual from the audit team. Now we have the close business relationship. Close business relationship is very similar to the financial interest. Like if the firm and the audit client, or the member of the firm and the audit client is having any sort of business relationship. For example, it can be a partnership, it can be a joint venture, it can be combined goods or services. It can be, for example, the firm promoting the services of the audit client, like acting as a distributor or promoter or marketer, whatever. So if you're having any sort of business relationship with the audit client alongside the audit, now the problem is alongside the audit. Like if it is only the business relationship you're having, then there is no problem. The problem is that you are doing the audit as well as you're having the business relationship. So when you're having a business relationship with the audit client, that represents self-interest and intimidation threat. Another threat may be the familiarity threat, because obviously when you're involved with them in the business relationship, it actually gives a familiarity status, so a familiarity threat as well. But we are not talking about that thing. We are mainly talking about the main threats. So how the self-interest threat? Now, self-interest threat is because the firm will always want to continue the audit as well as the business. They never want to lose either. So it is in their best interest to keep both. So in order to keep both, they may try to keep the client satisfied by being less skeptical, by not asking too many questions from them, by being lenient towards them within the audit. So this is the self-interest threat. Like the firm wants to continue both the audit and the business relationship. So in order to keep that, they may be less skeptical and things like that. Intimidation threat is when the client says you that if you are not performing the audit according to us, if you're asking too many questions, if you're asking for too many evidences, then we are going to cancel or terminate the business relationship with you guys. Now, this is a threat coming from the client, or they may say you that if you are not doing an audit according to us, we may give audit to someone else. Now, this is the intimidation. So because I've already told you that self-interest threat is about maintaining the both audit and the business relationship. So intimidation can seriously threaten the independence of the audit firm. Now the safeguards, now, it depends upon the practicality of the situation. For example, you believe that the audit is more important and business relationship is not, then you can terminate the business relationship. If you believe it is vice versa, that business relationship is significant, audit fee is not that much, then you can refuse the audit. Refuse the assurance engagement means refuse the audit. Don't do the audit, just continue with your business relationship. And if you believe you need to do the both, then you need to keep your business relationship to an immaterial level, not taking too much significant, not taking it to the significant level. Just keep it immaterial so that the client is not in a position to threaten you, to intimidate you. So this is the close business relationship representing self-interest and intimidation threat. Okay, now employment with an audit client. Now, there are few situations related to this. The first one is let's assume you, like for example, Bilal is taking the class, and Bilal is part of the audit team, and Bilal goes to the audit client for the audit, and Bilal is having such a nice personality and he knows the work as well. So let's assume I am the finance director over there in the audit client, and I see Bilal, his personality and his integrity of the work, for example, things like that, the competence, skills, whatever you call it. And I place the offer to Bilal that leave the audit firm and join us, for example, as an accountant or the financial controller or the assistant financial controller, whatever. So when the client is giving an offer to someone within the audit team, the first threat is the self-interest threat. This is related to the offer because obviously maybe the firm is not that much attractive for you and the audit client has given you some serious offer which led you to think on it, and you want to have a very good situation, win-win situation with the audit client. I know in order to avail that offer, you keep the audit simple, not asking too many questions, not being skeptical, being lenient towards the audit client. So this is what you are doing within the self-interest in order to avail the job offer. This is the first situation. Now, the second situation is that you have accepted that offer and now you are not part of the audit team and you are the member or employee of the audit client. Now, this is the second situation. You have accepted the job offer. You are now there in the audit client working on the financial statements as a financial controller or whatever. Now, the team that will be coming for the audit may have familiarity with you because you were their ex-colleagues. Maybe you are having friendship with them. Maybe you are still in contact with them. Maybe you spent too much time with them in the past. But for example, if you were new in the audit client and you just started your audit journey and you got an offer from the audit client and there's no one who know you within the audit firm, then there is no familiarity threat. Familiarity threat is when that you have spent a significant time within the audit firm. Everybody knows you. You're having a significant relationship with the ex-colleagues. And now when they will be coming to the audit, there will be familiarity threat which may affect the independence of the current audit team. Similarly, the intimidation. For example, if you were senior within the firm and someone junior is coming on the audit, you may threaten them. Like, for example, look, if you are not doing audit according to me, I may tell someone within the firm not to support you over there. So listen to me, just do the audit as I require and things like that. So familiarity and intimidation is in the second case. The first one is the self-interest. The second one is the familiarity and the intimidation. So it is possible that the staff might transfer between an audit firm and the audit client or that negotiations or interviews takes place to facilitate such movements, then first of all, it gives rise to the self-interest threat. And then when the offer is accepted, then the familiarity and intimidation. Now, what are the safeguards? ACCA Code of Ethics states that if there is still a significant connection between those individuals, the person who has joined the audit client and the current audit team, they're having a significant relationship, then there's no safeguard to reduce this threat to an acceptable level because they're still meeting, they're still friends, they're still having the connections. Then there's no safeguard to reduce this threat to an acceptable level. But in other cases, it can be modifying the audit plan. Now, why it is necessary to modify the audit plan? Because that person was part of your firm. That person knows how you perform the audit, what type of sample you choose, how you select the materiality. So they can manipulate the financial statement, maneuver the financial statement accordingly so that it doesn't come in your testing. So you need to change your audit plan. It should be an entirely new plan, which that person is not aware of. And this is possible when someone's senior or experience is being sent to the audit client. He will be able to change the audit plan. And the last safeguards is related to the first issue. Like, for example, if I was doing the audit and I was being offered some role in the audit client, so my work should be reviewed by a professional accountant so that, or for example, if I have accepted the job uh, after the audit, then my work should be reviewed by a professional accountant to confirm that my independence was not compromised by that job offer. So this is the employment with an audit client.